Right, this is a story about how three fellows, aged about 23, 24, in 1964, went over to Fraser Island for a week, and we didn't see another person for the whole week except ourselves and one other. And I'm one of them. You can see that I am me. The other two fellows are here today, and I'll bet you don't recognise them. Maybe I'll introduce you to them at the end of the program, and then you'll see. That's the three of us on the push bikes. We took our bikes over, and there's Col and Louis and me, and they won't mind me calling them Col and Louis because that's what we used to use to address each other in those days. Fraser Island, and this is where we went. Waddy Point at Hervey Bay. We left on a boat belonging to Wally Schultz. He was a professional fisherman in his days, and we got to know Wally, and he offered to take us over to Waddy Point and allow us to use his hut over there, and then he'd come back in a week's time, and if we were still there, he would bring us back home. This is the old Blitz that he had, and you can see right up the top near the windscreen a rectangular shape. That's the fuel tank. The original fuel tank had been wiped off with a root off a tree or something like that, and that one was just wired up the top there very loosely. If you went round a corner, it'd slide across the bonnet to that side, and then the other side. If you went down a hill, it would slide down towards the front, and if you went up the hill, it'd slide up towards the windscreen. By the way, it was 75 kilometres from Hervey Bay up to Watumba Creek, where that Blitz was. Then he drove us across the island, and you'll see Waddy Point in the distance there. The pictures are not coming out really bright because of all the light coming through there, but at least I can explain things. Waddy Point, this is a lagoon here and a big sand spit going out there, and that's looking north, going up towards Sandy Cape. A map showing Waddy Point. It's a high headland, and in here, those two black things, there are a couple of huts, and one of the huts was made out of driftwood, mainly, and this is the sheltered bay, the headland over there, and a lovely sheltered bay where we used to do fishing. That's the old hut. It had plenty of ventilation in it, and they didn't have a broom for the hut there because the floorboards had cracks in them wide enough that all you had to do to sweep the floor was to drag your feet across the floor as you walked, and the dirt would go through. This is on the far eastern side of the headland. That was when it was very, very rough, more or less right on the ocean side. Over the hill behind where you can't see, that's the freshwater lagoon, which was always nice and calm. We had a really bad storm with a very, very strong wind, and you can see the wind was so strong that it is blowing. You can see Col and Louis in there, and the wind is blowing the sand across the, through the air, and it would sting your back if you weren't wearing a shirt, or your legs, just like little pinpricks. The day after, the storm subsided, and that's Colin Louis, and you can see that beautiful freshwater lagoon. And the storm washed up some shells along the beach, and these are a couple. That's a helmet shell. This is one of the actual shells that was washed up in 1964, and a nautilus shell. That's full of chambers there on the inside, and the thing that lived in the shell was able to make it float or sink. There were also rock pools in the headland, and fish and seaweed growing on them. Now, this is in a little cave. Actually, the photograph is a lot darker than that, and I had a better look if I put on my mask and snorkel, went underneath, and you look there. And I saw a couple of fish swimming on the top. It was a little bit darkish in the cave, not too bad, and I thought I'd touch one of the fish. I poked my finger up like this, and I touched the fish, and yet I could not feel it. And then I pushed my finger further. It went right through the fish and out the other side of the fish, and the top end of my finger got quite cold, while the rest of my ham felt warm. Actually, in the top of the cave, there was a pocket of air trapped there. It was the surface was nice and flat, and it acted like a mirror, and it reflected everything underneath. So you can see that there's the fish on top. That's his reflection, and that's the fish. And you can see some more through there. That's Col in what we called the Champagne Pool. It derived its name when a big surf wave come over the headland and landed in the pool. There was a lot of bubbles that it made, and it was just like taking the cork out of a bottle and all the bubbles coming up. That's me on top, Col underneath, and we went to a lot of trouble to hold that pole up. Actually, the pole held me up there to stop me from overbalancing. You would know if you take photographs, you often get a better photograph if you're up at a bit of a height. And that's the result of that picture. A freshwater lagoon that we used to have a bath in every night when we had the time. That's fishing for whiting in the calm water. And there's Col fishing there. We didn't realise what was going to happen. We used to throw our fish up onto the bank behind the rock, and an extra large wave came up once, and I can remember Col chasing the fish because it washed all the fish down into the sea. The ones that had died we caught, the others, some of them got away. A mud crab, which is very unusual over on the ocean beach, which we used to call the back beach. We caught him in the lagoon out there. We did a bit of swimming round in the rock pools and on the outside, the outer ledge there. And we found a couple of stingrays hiding underneath a rock. We saw the stingrays' tails poking out. And then when we had a better look and we poked around a bit, it was the antennae of a crayfish poking out there. That's Colin and myself, a little homemade spear gun, and you can see there's a real dark cave going right into the headland there. And that's where you would get the best fish. They like to hide in the caves. Cowrie shells. The way we would find those cowries would be underneath the ledge or under a rock. You would put your hand under the rock and you would feel among little bits of sea growth and things. If you felt something nice and shiny, you were lucky. It was the shell of a cowrie shell. If you were unlucky, you would feel a crab. That's a brown sweet lip, 10 kilograms. That one came from under that big dark cave. Some of the caves go a long way under. I've got a bit to tell you about that. I skinned it and I saved the skin to make a handbag for my mother out of it. Although Mum wasn't keen on the handbag because she feared she'd be followed down the street by all the local cats and dogs. Surfworms. We caught surfworms for bait, and the way we caught them was you drag a bag that's got dead fish scraps in it along the beach, but where a wave comes up over the beach, it washes the smell of the fish from the bag down towards the sea as the wave recedes. The surfworm can smell that. He puts his head out of there, and we have a piece of bait out of a pippy, a little clamshell. We hold it down with our fingers like that at the surfworm's head, and the surfworm bites onto it, and as he arches his neck like that to pull it down, we tighten the grip around his neck and tighten it until it gets very tight, then we pull him out in one go. If you don't pull it out in one go, get it halfway up, he'll probably pull your hand down to the sound and probably try and pull your arm down the hole. Dolphin. We used to see dolphins. We'd sometimes climb right up on top of the headland and we would look out across the sea. Close in we'd see turtles, and further out we would see the odd shark swimming past. One night, a lovely calm night, we decided to walk out along the big sand spit. It went out for a few hundred yards long. It was a very, very dark night, and as we were walking, we could sense that we weren't the only people there. We thought it appeared that there was another fellow or somebody out there with us. We couldn't see. We stopped and we listened, and nothing. We walked on a little bit further. We stopped and listened again, and we were being watched. We thought, well, we'll go straight back and we'll lock the door of the hut severely that night. The way we locked it, we put a stick up against the door to hold it. Anyway, next morning, it was still low tide, so we walked out on the sand spit again, and we discovered who it was. It was a dingo. Dingo tracks were walking along the sides of our footprints. The dingoes, we didn't see many over there, but they seemed to be fairly friendly towards us. Also, one other night, no, it wasn't night, it was day, it was the morning. Louis was down the beach and he came running back to the hut as fast as he could. And he said, "Quick, lock the door and don't make a noise. Be really quiet. There's somebody else out there." And what's more, it was a girl. And a girl in a bikini. We young fellas then, in those days, we used to be frightened of girls. Our parents and other adults used to just make sure that we were frightened of them. If I was walking along the street in Maryborough, up Adelaide Street, and a girl was walking down towards me, I'd put my head down like that. I wouldn't dare look sideways like that, in case she was looking at me the same way. Otherwise, I'd walk across the other side of the road and back. I used to think the worst thing that could possibly happen to a fella would be if a strange girl ran up to you and kissed you. Not that that's likely to happen from a strange girl. I used to think that would be about as close to death as you would get. I could probably tell you that when Sue and I got married, Sue, the first bikini Sue ever bought was a three-piece. It consisted of a bottom piece, a top piece, and a blindfold for me. That's an example of somebody keeping the other person in the dark. This is heading off towards Sandy Cape. We decided to ride our bikes up to Sandy Cape Lighthouse. Just looking to see how the time is going. I'll have to go through some of these pictures a little bit quicker. That's looking north. There's a jellyfish that we found on the beach up there, washed ashore. And brumbies. I can remember calling myself up the beach and Louis was riding his bike along and it looked like two people coming along. When it got closer, we recognised it was a stallion. And just as well Louis didn't see that, otherwise he'd have passed us and got right up ahead of us, I think. The horse was coming just behind Louis. Nakala rocks. There's about 3 kilometres of these rocks, sandstone rocks, so that slowed the progress. Originally we had nice hard beach to ride our bikes along, but we had to carry our bikes and wheel them. And you can see what's happening there. Fresh water running over the side of the rock there. Obviously seeping down through some of the sand hills and at low tide coming over there to give us a drink. A turtle's nest, a glass ball. That's one of a number there. The Japanese used to use these glass balls for floats and markers for their fishing lines, and after storms at sea, some balls would come adrift and be washed ashore. We came across 18 of those glass balls between Waddy Point and Inskip Point. This is Sandy Cape there, and right out towards that end there you'll see Breaksea Spit. At this point we turned and we started riding our bikes south. That's about 5 kilometres of deep, dead seaweed that got washed ashore. And there's our first glimpse of Sandy Cape Lighthouse. Harry Tate, the lighthouse keeper, came down to meet us. And that's a view looking from the top of the light. He took us right up the top for a view. That's looking right down towards the lighthouse grounds. Sandy Cape Lighthouse is the highest lighthouse in the southern hemisphere. Or, well, it was then anyway. It probably still is. The lighthouse keepers, there is an assistant lighthouse keeper and the main lighthouse keeper. There are two bulbs that shine the light there, and that light will shine 40 kilometres. Having two bulbs in, one light is lit up. If it happens to blow, the other light will automatically swing around into position and take up position. The light is checked every night up there to make sure it's still working. That's the prismatic light, lens system. That enhances the light and allows it to shine. I don't know whether I told you, it produces 1 million candle power. And that's a view from the top of the lighthouse, looking out towards Breaksea Spit. Right on the end of Breaksea Spit there's a lightship. And they have a telescope to see the lightship, about 40 kilometres out. The telescope is set in a cradle, which aims it right at the lightship. And with that telescope, they can see whether the lightship, indicating the end of the sand spit, has moved position. That's the lighthouse at night. That's Harry Tate on the right, Thelma in the back there, and the two children. Thelma invited us to stay for the night. During the night, they used the side of the lighthouse as a screen and gave us a picture show. Tea that night, and gave us a bed to stay. The tea consisted of some very, very hot curry, and I was having trouble eating it. I'd take one mouthful and 2 mouthfuls of water. And Thelma eventually said to me, look, how are you going? She noticed something. And I said, well, look, I'm not really used to eating hot curry. And then she asked Col and Louis, and how are you going? Are you doing all right with it? And Col and Louis were more tactful than myself. They were more polite. They said, oh, no, it's lovely. We're really enjoying it, thank you. And with that, Thelma emptied the rest of the pot on their plates and said, well, here, have some more then. I knew that Col and Louis were having the trouble that I was. So sometimes it's good to be polite, and sometimes it's not quite. That's the lighthouse cat. This was summertime. It kept Col lovely and warm that night, on a hot night, by sleeping at the foot of his bed. This is saying goodbye to Harry and the others in the morning. So then we rode off on our bikes, got up to Sandy Cape, and there was a lagoon of salt water trapped behind a sandbank, but flowing in an entrance out to the sea, and there were fish in it. It was only about, well, it wasn't very deep, and you can see here trying to catch fish, and we caught 2 mullet and a whiting in our bare hands. There's the bikes loaded up with as much as we could, shells and glass balls on them, returning back to Waddy Point. And that's how the bikes were loaded. Every part of the bike that could have something tied on it did have. And Col on the back there with a few of the shells, you'd recognise that one that you saw earlier. And myself and Louis with the little bits of whiskers or beard growing there, that indicates a good holiday, not having to shave at home. And that's the last of it. That's Waddy Point looking over the lagoon at sunset. And I wonder if my two friends here would come up here and look towards you so that you can see if you can recognise them. I was nearly going to say no, they wouldn't. That's Col.
Only slightly older.
Yes, yeah. Col Bellett and Linton Lewis. Thank you.